In this town, my silence was never read as discipline, only as proof I was lying. That sentence had lived in me for so long it felt less like language and more like scar tissue, a hard seam under the skin that ached when weather shifted and when people smiled too brightly. The person who taught me that lesson wore a navy dress with pearl buttons and held a microphone like a ceremonial scepter. Marlene Pike, owner of Pike's Diner, chair of the town events committee, curator of respectable memory. My name is Casey Dawn Dawson, former Army platoon medic, and tonight they were going to force me to prove I existed where they said I never stood. The Veterans Heritage Gala had been arranged with the kind of precision small towns reserve for visible virtue. Long tables draped in white cloth, polished brass candle holders, folded programs with sponsor logos, framed regimental photos set along the side wall under fluorescent spill that made every glass surface look cold. The military hall sat beside Marlene's diner, and even with the hall doors shut, I could smell coffee threading through the corridor, bitter and familiar, as if the accusation had a scent and had been brewing since dawn. Men in sports coats and women in formal blouses moved through the room with practiced civic warmth. They touched elbows, exchanged condolences for wars they had only watched on television, and used words like sacrifice in tones meant to photograph well. I arrived early because lateness reads like guilt in rooms already tilted against you. I signed in at the registration table where a volunteer with silver reading glasses scanned the list twice before finding my name. She did not look up when she handed me my place card. Table 9, end seat, near the service door where staff entered with coffee urns and trays of rolls. The seating chart had the Veterans Board at the centre, donors near the stage, and the people Marlene called community pillars in the first ring of visibility. I was not a pillar. I was a procedural inconvenience with a name tag. When I reached my seat, I adjusted the chair exactly once, set my clutch under the table, and folded my napkin across my lap. I had learned to occupy public space without asking permission for the width of my shoulders. Across the room, Marlene worked the crowd with a smile that never warmed her eyes. She touched forearms, tilted her head, and told people where to stand for photos as if she were arranging evidence. Her voice carried even before she was amplified. "We're honouring real stories tonight." The word real hung in the air like a warning label. 3 years earlier, when I came home from my second deployment, I had moved into my father's house because cancer had reached the stage where pain controlled his mornings and paperwork controlled his afternoons. I learned dosage schedules, insurance coding, meal textures, and how to lift him from bed without making him feel handled. I declined parade invitations, skipped interviews, and did not correct people who assumed I had been in logistics or stateside support. I worked night shifts at the county clinic, then took my father to oncology at sunrise, then slept in a chair by the window when he drifted off. People saw me carrying grocery bags and prescriptions. They did not see the nightmares, the incident reports, or the way my hands shook the first time fireworks cracked behind the high school bleachers. In the absence of explanation, the town wrote its own. Marlene wrote it in permanent ink. At memorial events, she introduced my brother's friend who had completed basic training but never deployed, then forgot to call my name. At donor banquets, she listed local veterans by branch and years served, then said, "Casey helps at the clinic," as if help were the closest word available to service. She framed each omission as policy. "We require verification. We only list active records. No personal stories from unconfirmed sources." The language sounded administrative, and that was its brilliance. Cruelty in this town wore a lanyard and used clipboards. By the second week of September, people had begun repeating her phrasing back to me in softened tones, the way gossip evolves into borrowed principle. "You know how careful Marlene is." "It's not personal, Casey. There have been fraud cases, after all." A narrative hardens when it gives bystanders a reason to feel ethical. I did not argue at checkout counters or church foyers. I did not spread documents across cafe tables and ask strangers to audit my life. Silence was not peace. It was triage. You control the bleeding first. At 7:13, Marlene tapped her glass, then lifted the microphone from its stand. The hall quieted in ripples, conversations closing one table at a time until silverware rested and faces turned toward the stage. I watched her from table 9 while she thanked sponsors, named committee members, and praised our town's unwavering commitment to truth and honour. She invited two older veterans to stand for applause. She read citations from note cards. She made the room feel orderly, and in orderly rooms people accept hierarchy before they examine it. Then she shifted her weight and looked directly at me. "Tonight," she said, bright ceremonial voice polished for public record, "we celebrate real veterans and real service. Stories that are documented, accountable, and verified." A few people nodded. Someone near the centre laughed quietly, not at a joke, but at the relief of hearing boundaries explained. Marlene continued, "We cannot let this space become performance. We owe respect to those who actually served." There are moments when humiliation does not arrive as heat, but as cold calibration. I could feel the room measuring distance between her podium and my chair, between her certainty and my silence, between what I could prove and what they preferred to believe. Marlene raised her chin. "Sit down, Casey. These stories belong to people who actually served." No one gasped. That is what I remember most. The reaction was not outrage but compliance, as if they were watching a procedural correction after a clerical error. Heads turned toward me in synchronized curiosity. A woman at my table withdrew her hand from the water pitcher and set it down with deliberate care, unwilling to be seen taking sides. A board member glanced at the master of ceremonies, then at his program, then at the ceiling. Social weather is easy to read when you have spent years reading triage rooms. Everyone was waiting to see whether I would make this easy for them by breaking first. I did not stand. I did not shout. I did not leave. I straightened my spine against the chair, pressed 2 fingers to the fold of my napkin, and breathed once, deep enough to clear the narrowing in my chest. In theatre like this, the first person to lose composure is the first person erased. Marlene knew that. She had built her authority on knowing exactly how far she could push while remaining deniable. If I erupted, she would call it instability. If I cried, she would call it stress. If I fled, she would call it admission. My restraint was not passivity, it was command discipline translated to civilian terrain. "I am seated," I said, voice even, hands still. Marlene held the microphone near her mouth and smiled with small civic patience. "Good, then we can proceed." Proceed, as if she were directing traffic around a pothole. The program resumed. A brass quartet played a hymn near the stage. A retired colonel delivered remarks about civic unity and duty across generations. Applause rose and fell on cue. Servers poured coffee from stainless urns that clicked against porcelain cups. The smell from the diner deepened as kitchen doors opened in the corridor. Fluorescent light skimmed the framed photos on the wall. Young faces in uniforms from different decades, mouths tight, eyes forward, names engraved below. I had once asked to contribute one of my platoon photos from Kandahar, cropped to remove location markers. Marlene had denied the request on verification timing grounds. 2 weeks later, she added a donor's grandson in dress blues, no deployment ribbon, full plaque. An hour moved past in ceremonial segments. I listened, watched, and mapped the room the way I had mapped aid stations. Entry points, pressure points, who deferred to whom, which voices carried, and which did not. At 8:26, the Veterans Board liaison left his table to take a call in the hallway. At 8:31, he returned, expression tightened, and spoke quietly to Marlene between agenda items. She nodded, lifted her chin, and announced a final toast to integrity in remembrance. She did not look at me again. She did not need to. She believed the correction had already been entered into public memory. When the closing applause ended, chairs scraped back and clusters formed near the exits. People avoided my gaze with exquisite politeness. A woman I had known since middle school touched my sleeve and said, "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," then moved on before I could answer. At the sign-out table, a volunteer handed me a commemorative pin by reflex, then hesitated and asked for it back with an embarrassed smile. "Committee instruction," she whispered. I placed the pin in her palm and said, "Of course." Outside, the night air carried late autumn chill and diesel from a passing delivery truck. The hall's side windows reflected fluorescent rectangles onto the parking lot, hard-edged and pale. Through the diner's glass front, I could see Marlene behind the counter speaking to 2 patrons, her hands animated, already narrating the evening in whatever version would settle by morning as accepted truth. I stood beneath the awning long enough to feel the cold through my sleeves, long enough to let the first clean line of resolve settle where the wound had lived. They had taken my silence for surrender. because surrender is easier to recognize than restraint. They had mistaken my refusal to perform pain for proof that no pain existed. That was their error, not my identity. The same audience that heard the accusation would hear the verification, and not from me alone. From records with chain of custody, from signatures that held command weight, from voices whose rank could not be laughed off over coffee and pie. I started the engine, checked the rearview mirror, and drove home without turning on the radio. By midnight, the town would have finished retelling what happened. By morning, I would begin correcting the record in a language rumour cannot overrule. My name is Casey Dawn Dawson. I served, and I was done asking permission to exist in my own history. At the first red light past the grain elevator, my phone vibrated against the cup holder hard enough to rattle the keys. I let it ring once, twice, then touched the hands-free button without taking my eyes off the intersection. The volunteer from registration spoke in a careful hush, as if she was standing inside a church after the service had gone wrong. Casey, this is Lila from the gala desk. There is a committee packet with your name on it. Ms. Pike asked that you sign for receipt tonight. I kept my voice flat. Where? At the diner counter. They are locking the hall now. The light turned green. I drove straight for half a block, then signalled, turned right and circled back toward Main Street. I didn't need the packet. I needed to know what she had put in writing and who she wanted to watch me accept it. Pike's Diner glowed through its glass front in a wash of amber and stainless reflections, the bell over the door chiming every few minutes as gala guests drifted in for late coffee and posturing. Through the windows I could see white corsages, dark jackets, polished shoes, and faces turned toward Marlene as if the evening's true ceremony had been relocated from the hall to her register. She was behind the counter with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a stack of mugs at her right hand, her posture easy with ownership. The room smelled of coffee grounds, syrup, fryer oil, and the lemon disinfectant she used after 9 o'clock. When I opened the door, the chime cut across her sentence and she pivoted with a smile sharpened for witnesses. There she is, she said, loud enough for every booth to hear. Casey, come sign your paperwork. We keep records here. A few people looked down at their pie plates. Most did not. They watched. I walked to the counter without removing my coat. A clipboard waited beside the credit card terminal, one page clipped over another, my name printed in block capitals. Marlene set her hand on the top sheet and did not release it. Before you sign, she said, still projecting, I want this clear for everyone present. Our town honours verified service. We cannot have fabricated claims attached to official events. Correct? The question was not for me. It was for the audience she had curated. I met her eyes. If there is a document, I will read it. She tilted her head, performing patience. Read after you sign receipt. Standard chain. The phrase would have been almost funny in another life. Chain of custody from a woman who built rumour as if it were policy. I took the clipboard. The top page was a notice from the events committee stating that I had been removed from speaking eligibility pending credential confirmation. Under that, in smaller text, was a recommendation that partner organisations refrain from featuring unverified military narratives in donor-facing venues. It was civil language for civic quarantine. At the bottom sat a line for my signature acknowledging receipt, next to time and date fields already filled by hand, 10:17 p.m. Marlene tapped the paper with one polished nail. Just sign where marked. We all have to follow standards. From the second stool near the pie case, a man I recognized from the hardware store said, "No offense, Casey, but this protects real veterans." No offense. The most efficient preface to offense ever invented. I signed my name exactly as printed, wrote the correct time in the margin and handed the clipboard back. Receipt acknowledged, content disputed. Marlene's smile thinned. Disputed based on what? Procedure. I said nothing else. She wanted heat, a raised voice, one sentence she could quote tomorrow as instability. She wanted to point at emotion and call it evidence. I gave her diction instead. She flipped to the second page and read from it as if announcing raffle numbers. For public clarity, the committee found no local records supporting your claimed role. Until confirmed, you are not to present yourself at committee events as military personnel. The word claimed hung there, heavy and sticky. Someone at the back laughed once, then stopped when no one joined him. The dishwasher hissed in the kitchen. A spoon struck porcelain. Then silence folded back over the room. I could feel my pulse in my jaw, a hard thud that made my molars ache. I kept my hands open on the counter so no one could say they saw me shake. From the left booth, Mrs. Talcott, who had sat beside my mother at church for 20 years, cleared her throat. "Marlene, perhaps this can be handled privately." Marlene did not look at her. "Transparency is private now." Then she faced me again and delivered the line she had clearly saved. "Sit down, Casey. Real veterans do not need to convince a diner." The booth nearest the window went still. 2 men in gala ties looked from her to me and back, waiting for impact. I understood in that exact second that humiliation in this town was rarely spontaneous. It was rehearsed, then debuted. I did not sit. I did not argue. I placed my palms on the edge of the counter, leaned in just enough that only she could hear the first sentence, and kept the second sentence for the room. "But do not confuse volume with authority," I said quietly. Then, at normal level, "If you are done, I am leaving." Her eyes flashed, not with uncertainty yet, but with irritation that the script had not produced the scene she wanted. We are done when records are done. Then file them. I turned, walked back through the aisle between booths and kept my pace, even though every muscle in my back was braced for one more call-out. The door chime rang above me as I stepped into the cold. Behind the glass, conversation resumed in low ripples, and Marlene lifted a coffee pot like a gavel. By 10:40, I was in my kitchen with the overhead light off and the stove hood light on. The only illumination a small pool across legal pads and a closed laptop. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator compressor and the tick of the wall clock my father had fixed twice and refused to replace. I set the committee notice on the table, took a photo of each page, and logged the file names with timestamps in a notebook marked Clinic Supply because it was the only spiral pad within reach. Anger arrived in waves, but it was clean anger, not chaos. I knew what to do with clean anger. I opened my laptop and drafted a single email addressed to the Veterans Board liaison, copied to County Records Intake and the Town Clerk. Subject line, "Formal request for credential review, hearing and preservation of public record." No adjectives, no accusations. In the body, I listed the event time, the exact language of the notice, the names of visible witnesses, and a request for official process within 24 hours due to ongoing public reputational harm. I attached scans of Marlene's document and asked for confirmation of receipt. At 10:58 p.m., I sent it. My phone lit with 3 texts within 2 minutes. From my cousin Nora. "Heard there was a scene. Please do not make this worse." From an unknown number. "If you have proof, why hide it all these years?" From a former classmate. "Marlene says you threatened her at counter. Is that true?" I set the phone face down and kept writing. Incident log. Page 2. Exact wording used at diner. Location of security camera over register. Approximate number of patrons present. I had learned in medicine that memory decays under stress unless you pin it to paper while the details are still warm. I wrote until my handwriting steadied. At 11:12, the liaison replied with a brief acknowledgement and one line that mattered. "County records hearing can be scheduled at 9 a.m. pending complaint status. Preserve all materials." No sympathy, no validation, procedure. It was enough. I printed the email chain, clipped it to Marlene's notice, and placed both in a manila folder. Then I took out the small lockbox from the pantry shelf, the one that held my discharge copy, immunization records, and my father's will. I didn't open it yet. I only set it on the table and rested my hand over the lid until the tendons in my wrist stopped buzzing. At 11:27, the doorbell rang. I froze, listening. One ring, then another, patient and measured. I checked the porch camera from my phone. Irene Bell stood under the light in a camel coat, grey hair pinned at the nape, both hands around a sealed legal envelope as if it was something breakable and necessary. I opened the door. She did not step inside. "I heard what happened," she said. Her voice carried the dry steadiness of someone who had read grief into official files for decades and no longer wasted words. "I also heard what was filed this afternoon. I thought you should have this before morning." She held out the envelope. My name was typed across the front with county clerk stamps in blue at both seams. "Irene, what is this?" "Records that should have been requested first, not denied first." She met my eyes. "Do not discuss this on the phone. Bring it, sealed, to hearing." The porch light buzzed faintly above us. Somewhere down the block, a truck shifted gears, then faded. I took the envelope with both hands. "Thank you," I said. She gave one short nod. "Discipline is not the same thing as silence. Use the first." Then she turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the dark line of parked cars. I locked the door, returned to the kitchen table, and set the envelope beside the lockbox without breaking the seal. My phone kept lighting with incoming messages, each one asking for reaction, confession, apology, spectacle. I left them unanswered. By midnight, the town would continue telling the easy version. At 9 in the morning, the easy version would meet a record it did not control. I drew one slow breath, wrote the final line in my log, and closed the notebook. No outburst. No retreat. Formal response initiated. I underlined the last sentence once, capped the pen, and kept my hand on the notebook until the pressure in my chest settled into something I could name. Procedure gave shape to panic, but it did not erase the years that had trained this town to doubt me on command. The lockbox sat under the stovelight like a quiet instruction. I pulled it closer, entered the code, and lifted the lid. Inside, documents lay in neat stacks separated by old pharmacy dividers, discharge papers, immunization records, emergency contacts, my father's will, his hospice directives, and a folder I had labelled local in black marker after the third time a committee asked for clarification. I took local out and spread the contents across the table. Every page was a small administrative refusal. The first letter was from the Heritage Gala Committee, dated 2 years earlier, denying my request to submit a service photograph for the Veterans Wall. Reason listed, verification pending. I remembered that afternoon in detail because my father had been sleeping in his recliner when I printed the application, and I had stood in the hallway whispering into my phone to avoid waking him, while Marlene's assistant informed me in careful civic diction that the display was reserved for fully vetted profiles. 10 days later, they added 3 new photos, including one of a donor's nephew in training uniform, graduation week, no deployment history. When I asked if the policy had changed, Marlene answered in person at the diner, coffee pot in hand, smile perfectly courteous. "It has not changed, Casey. We evaluate context." I had looked at the wall, then back at her. "My context includes 2 deployments." Her answer came without a pause. "Context also includes credibility." I set that letter aside and pulled the next document. Memorial Day Parade, year before last. Application to ride with veterans contingent denied because vehicle capacity was finalised. Attached note in blue ink from the events subcommittee. You may join the medical volunteers near the hydration tent. I had accepted the hydration assignment because my father needed oxygen checks every 4 hours and because arguing in public had never made room where none was being offered. I could still see the parade route in hard noon light. Flags snapping over Main Street, brass instruments running half a beat behind the drumline, and the first float carrying men in branch caps, while spectators applauded in waves. I stood by a folding table of bottled water and electrolyte packets, and children asked me where the real veterans were lining up for photos. I pointed to the street and kept passing cups. 3 days passed before I received a follow-up email from Marlene thanking me for my community-minded flexibility. She copied the town newsletter editor. I sorted through more pages, donor banquet seating charts with my name omitted from veteran tables and placed under public health support, town hall commemorative program listing me under volunteer acknowledgements, a printed screenshot of the committee website from last fall, where someone in the comments had written, if she served, why no one from her unit ever visits. Underneath, Marlene had posted from the official account, we rely on verifiable local records. I had never answered publicly. I answered by caring for my father through nights when pain medicine stopped masking what cancer was doing to him. I answered by working clinic shifts, by stocking crash carts, by taking call, by not using my history as a social credential. In any place that understood discipline, that would have been enough. Here, restraint read as vacancy. By 1 in the morning, I had arranged the papers in chronological order and could trace the architecture of the rumour as if it were an engineering diagram. 1 exclusion framed as policy, 1 omission framed as oversight, 1 public correction framed as transparency, repeated until doubt looked like ethics. I knew when it began to harden. My father's funeral, 18 months after I came home, the receiving line had formed in the church annex under fluorescent panels that buzzed faintly above trays of finger sandwiches. No one touched. People spoke softly, held my hand for the proper length of time, then moved to my brother, who wore our father's old lapel pin and accepted condolences like inherited rank. Marlene arrived in a charcoal suit, clasped both my hands and said, "Your father always valued honesty. He would want this family represented with dignity." I thought grief had made me mishear her. Then, at the post-service meal, she stood near the coffee urn and told 2 town council members that complicated stories should be left out of memorial programming until records were secure. I was 10 feet away holding my father's prescription bag because I had not yet remembered to throw it out. No one confronted her. No one asked me a direct question. They simply adopted caution around me, the way people avoid stepping on cracked pavement at night, even when they cannot see the edge clearly. That autumn, the county newspaper ran a feature on local service legacies. The reporter called my house polite and brisk and asked for comment on questions circulating about unverified claims. I declined the interview, told her she could submit a records request through official channels, and hung up. 2 days later, the article printed without my name under a sidebar titled "Honouring Confirmed Service Histories." The phrase looked objective in serif font. My clinic supervisor clipped the piece and left it in the break room by accident or by habit. In small towns, those are often the same thing. I moved the newspaper clipping under the lockbox lid and kept sorting. There was a printed exchange with the town clerk from last winter when I asked why I had been removed from the Veterans' Day reading list after receiving confirmation the week prior. Reply: scheduling adjustment. Separate message from Marlene sent 11 minutes later. We cannot risk disputed biographies at official podium events. I had gone anyway, stood at the edge of the hall near the coat rack and listened while people mispronounced names of operations they had never studied. When the MC invited all verified veterans to stand for recognition, 3 people at my row turned and looked at me with gentle warning not to complicate the ceremony. I stayed seated. My knees locked so hard my legs trembled under the chair. Silence was not peace. It was a cost I kept paying because my father needed stability, because the clinic needed reliability, because every institution in town moved through Marlene's committee one way or another, and I had no appetite left for public brawls disguised as civic process. She understood that calculus and used it. Not with shouting, not with crude insults, but with meeting minutes, updated guidelines, and the soft steel of procedural language. At 1:24 a.m., my phone lit again with an incoming call from a number I recognized from county records. I answered on speaker and stated my name for the record. "Ms. Dawson, this is Deputy Clerk Hanley. Confirming your request is entered for 900 hours. Bring all supporting materials sealed where indicated. Do not alter stamped packets. You may provide oral statement after initial review. Is the complaint attached to my docket?" A pause, pages turning. "Yes. Complainant Marlene Pike on behalf of Town Events Committee. Allegation: fraudulent veteran representation in public civic venues." Her phrasing was neutral, but hearing it read into an official line felt like cold metal laid against my sternum. I asked, "Will board liaison attend?" "Listed as present, subject to availability." Another pause. "Ms. Dawson, if you have witness documentation, bring originals and 1 copy." "I will." When the call ended, the kitchen sounded unusually loud. Compressor hum, clock tick, pipes clicking in the wall as the water heater cycled. I set the phone down and looked at Irene's sealed envelope. Under the stove light, one corner showed a faint raised outline against the paper, circular, as if a small object had been enclosed in a secondary evidence sleeve. I turned the envelope carefully and saw a transparent clerk window on the back with an itemization strip, typed in compressed capitals. Exhibit A, Certified Service Record Abstract. Exhibit B, Commendation Extracts, Casualty Lane Response. Exhibit C, Incident Review, Command Signatures. Exhibit D, Metallic Challenge Coin, Unit Crest, catalogued as corroborative identifier. My throat tightened so quickly I had to brace a hand on the table. I did not break the seal. I traced the stamped edges with my fingertip and read the final line of the inventory twice. Chain verified by County Clerk Archive, Irene Bell, Witness Custodian. The coin's existence inside that packet did something documentation alone had never done. Paper can be dismissed by people who have never handled official files. They call it bureaucracy and move on. A challenge coin carries another grammar. It is handed, not framed. It marks belonging in a system that does not distribute sentiment by committee vote. If that coin was what I thought it was, it had my call sign engraved on one face and the platoon crest on the other, the one our command sergeant major ordered after the Arghandab evacuation, when half our gear was still dust-coated and none of us wanted speeches. I had carried mine in my left cargo pocket for months until the edge wore smooth enough to catch no fabric. I closed my eyes and the memory arrived, complete. Hammered steel sky before dawn, rotor wash chopping dust into our mouths, Ruiz shouting over the medevac noise, my gloves slick with saline and dirt, the weight of 2 litters and 1 radio strapped across my shoulder. Afterward, at the forward aid station, she had pressed the coin into my palm and said, "You do not get to disappear because you prefer quiet." I had answered with a nod because there were still casualties inbound and no room for ceremony. I opened my eyes to the kitchen light and looked again at the inventory strip. Irene had found the lane of proof Marlene could not spin into opinion. Certified chain, command signatures, physical unit identifier. Not a speech, evidence. At 1:40 a.m, I sent 1 email to Deputy Clerk Hanley and copied the liaison, confirming receipt of sealed archive packet from certified custodian Irene Bell. Packet remains unopened and intact. Requesting notation that Exhibit D includes physical corroborative identifier. Within 4 minutes, Hanley replied with a 1-line acknowledgement and a case note number. I wrote the number on my incident log, then on a yellow sticky tab attached to the envelope's corner. I moved through the rest of the preparation with the same discipline I used in treatment bays. Originals on left, copies on right, tabs by date, witness list clipped to front. Under external contacts, I logged each call and response, including no response texts from private numbers. Under physical evidence, I listed the committee notice from the diner, photo timestamps, email chain, sealed archive packet, lockbox records. I left space beside each item for hearing disposition. At 2:05 a.m, I finally opened the lockbox's bottom compartment and removed a faded fabric pouch that had not seen light in years. Inside were my old dog tags, a folded map segment with grid markings long declassified, and a second challenge coin, dull from wear, edges nicked. I set it beside Irene's sealed packet without touching the envelope. 2 circles of metal, one in hand and one in evidence. 2 versions of the same truth, lived and documented. I drank a glass of water at the sink, returned to the table, and packed everything into a plain black briefcase. No medals, no photographs, no symbolic theatre beyond what the record itself already carried. The town had taught itself to trust performance in polished rooms. Tomorrow I would give them file numbers, signatures, and testimony they could quote under oath. At 2:17 a.m, I turned off the stove light, leaving only the clock face visible above the doorway. I stood in the dark kitchen a moment longer, listening to the house settle around me, and repeated the line I needed to carry into morning without anger and without apology. Silence was now a selection, not a surrender. Then I set 3 alarms, placed the briefcase by the door, and went upstairs to wait for daylight with the record intact. I lay on top of the bedspread without taking off my clothes, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in a slow, uneven circle, and listened to the town continue without me. Cars passed on Oak Street in short intervals, tyres hissing over damp pavement. A dog barked twice and stopped. My phone lit on the nightstand every few minutes with messages I did not open, each vibration a small request for me to perform one of the roles already prepared. Denial, apology, anger, collapse. I closed my eyes and recited document order instead. Committee notice, email chain, incident log, sealed archive packet, until the sequence settled into muscle memory. At 5:42, before the first alarm, I got up, showered in water just shy of hot, dressed in a charcoal blouse and dark slacks, and pinned my county clinic badge inside my bag where no one would read it as argument. Downstairs, I checked the envelope seals under the kitchen light, photographed each stamped edge with timestamp on, and wrote the new images into the log. By 6:10, the briefcase was in the passenger seat and the house was locked behind me. County records occupied the second floor of the old municipal annex, a building that smelled like waxed floors, printer toner, and aging binders. The hallway lights were fluorescent and unforgiving, flattening everyone into the same tired palette. I arrived at 8:21 and signed the attendance ledger at a folding table outside hearing room B. Deputy Clerk Hanley took my identification, compared signatures, and placed a green sticker on my file. "Do not open sealed packet until instructed," he said. "You will be called in docket order." Marlene arrived at 8:34 in a cream blazer and a civic smile, carrying a leather folio thick with tabbed pages. Two members of her events committee followed a step behind and took seats near the door as if they were attending a board presentation. She acknowledged me only by glancing at my briefcase, then turned to the municipal attorneys with the ease of familiarity. "Councillor Reed," she said, "thank you for expediting this. Our concern is institutional integrity." Reed, narrow-faced and precise, nodded. "We will keep this procedural." The second attorney, Klein, looked at me with polite distance and asked, "Ms. Dawson, you are self-represented?" "I am," I said. He gave a small, non-committal nod that in another setting would have been neutral. In that hallway with Marlene's committee watching, it read as a classification. At 8:56, Hanley opened the door and called us in. Hearing Room B was built for budget hearings and permit disputes, not contested identity, but hierarchy still arranged itself cleanly. Raised bench for the records officer, side table for municipal counsel, centre table for complainant, secondary table against the wall for respondent materials. Marlene took centre without being directed. I moved toward the opposite table and had just set down my briefcase when Reed lifted a hand. "Ms. Dawson, please take the public chair until we establish threshold admissibility." It was a minor procedural choice, defensible on paper, and a precise social demotion in practice. Marlene remained at council table with her folio open and water poured. I sat in a moulded plastic chair 3 feet behind the line where participants conferred. Hanley avoided my eyes while arranging exhibits. The Veterans Board liaison, Mr. Cole, entered at 9:02, placed his binder at council side and spoke first to Marlene. "Ms. Pike." "Mr. Cole." He turned to me then. "Ms. Dawson." 3 names, same syllables, different weight. The records officer, Ms. Voss, called the matter to order and read the complaint into the record. Allegation of fraudulent veteran representation in official civic venues. Request for corrective annotation and event disqualification pending verification. Her voice was even, mechanical, the way people read weather advisories. Then Reed began with Marlene's filing, framing it as protective governance. "Our town has experienced prior concerns regarding unverified claims," he said. "Ms. Pike seeks clarity, not punishment." Marlene folded her hands. "This is about standards." When it was my turn, Klein asked questions that sounded neutral and landed like cross-examination by assumption. "Why did you decline public interviews after return?" "Why no prior direct submission to county archive?" "Why are there gaps in local ceremony participation if service was continuous?" Each answer I gave was concise. My father's medical care required privacy. I submitted records through designated channels. They were delayed or redirected. Ceremony participation was not a legal prerequisite to service validity. Reed wrote notes as I spoke, not looking up. Then he asked the line Marlene had been waiting for. "Do you possess actual operational proof beyond personal assertion?" I reached for the sealed envelope. "Certified archive packet. Chain verified by County Clerk Witness Custodian Irene Bell." Hanley stepped forward, checked the seam stamps against the intake log, read the case note number aloud and placed the envelope on the evidence pad. Voss instructed him to open it in room view. The tear strips split cleanly. He removed the contents one item at a time. Service abstract with raised certification seal, commendation extracts, incident review with command signatures, and a small evidence sleeve containing a metallic challenge coin catalogued as corroborative identifier. The coin flashed dull bronze under fluorescent light, the crest unmistakable even from where I sat. Marlene leaned toward Reed, whispering quickly. Reed stood. "We request temporary pause for authenticity verification through federal channels." Voss granted 10 minutes. During the recess, I stayed in my chair while counsel gathered at the front table in a close arc that did not include me. They spoke in low tones over my documents, passed pages hand to hand, and once, when Cole looked back toward me, Reed angled his body to block the line of sight. No one told me to approach. No one asked if I wanted to clarify anything in person. The exclusion was tidy, procedural and public. At 9:41, proceedings resumed. Voss read preliminary findings. Documents appeared facially valid. Further confirmation required for final notation. No immediate finding of fraud entered at this stage. Then she added a condition. Given community impact, she said, This office requests corroborative witness testimony before final administrative correction. Hearing reconvenes at 1400 hours for supplemental record. Marlene's expression tightened for half a second and reset. Understood. Cole asked, "Can respondent provide witness by that time?" I answered before Reed could. "Yes." Reed lifted a brow. "From her claimed unit?" "From my platoon, if available." Klein tapped his pen. "Please understand, Ms. Dawson, statements from friends are not equivalent to command verification." I met his eyes. "Then you should prefer command verification." Voss instructed all parties to refrain from public commentary pending continuation. Marlene nodded with model compliance. In the hallway 5 minutes later, she told a cluster of waiting citizens, loudly enough to carry, "Paper packets can be assembled. We all know that." Cole heard her and did not correct her. He only reminded everyone, "No official statements until continuation." By the second hour past noon, the fluorescent hum had turned the annex windows into pale mirrors, and my coffee from the vending machine had gone cold in the cup. I used the recess to make one call from the stairwell where reception held steady. The number in my old contacts still carried an out-of-state area code. "Ruiz," a woman answered on the second ring, voice clipped, alert. I stood straighter without thinking. "Command Sergeant Major Ruiz, this is Casey Dawson, former specialist, 3rd Platoon, Falcon Company." A beat of silence, then, "Dawson, I wondered when this town would force your hand." The breath I had been controlling all morning shifted in my chest. "I have a county records continuation at 1400. They requested corroborative witness testimony. There is also ongoing public defamation at Pike's Diner." Ruiz did not ask for context she already understood. "Send location pin and docket number." "I can text from this number." "Do it now." A pause, softer by 1 degree. "Hold your line, Doc. We are not late to our own record." When the call ended, I texted the docket, the annex address, and one additional line. "Diner is active rumour site. Lunch crowd, heavy." She replied with a single word. "Received." At 12:27, I walked back to Main Street because sitting in that hallway would have turned waiting into spectacle. Pike's Diner windows were fogged at the edges from heat and dish steam. Inside, the lunch rush was dense. Construction crews at the counter, retirees in window booths, 2 committee volunteers still wearing gala name badges as if the event had never ended. I took a seat near the back wall under the service photo display where empty hooks marked removed frames and handwritten labels shifted to close gaps. My own name had never been there, but a fresh strip of blue painter's tape now covered the spot where I had submitted an application 2 years earlier, as if even the possibility needed to be masked. Marlene was at the register, voice carrying in bright civic intervals between orders. Verification protects everyone. No one is above documentation. I feel for her, truly, but feelings are not records. Each sentence arrived plated with concern and served to the room like pie. A waitress set down water and asked what I wanted. "Coffee," I said. "Black." Before she turned away, Marlene called across the floor. "No tab service for non-compliant parties." The waitress hesitated, then faced me with apology in her eyes. "Prepay policy," she murmured. I took out cash, set it on the table, and nodded. Another slight small enough to deny, visible enough to instruct the room. 2 men at the counter glanced back. One gave a faint shrug that said, "This is unfortunate but understandable." I drank the coffee when it came, bitter and overbrewed, and reviewed witness points in my notebook. Identity, rank at discharge, service dates, incident corroboration, chain verification. At 12:46, Mr. Cole entered the diner with a folder under his arm, ordered takeout soup, and took a stool 3 seats from Marlene. She leaned toward him. "Can you believe she called in outside people for theatre?" Cole kept his voice low. "Ms. Pike, avoid characterization." She lifted her hands. "I am merely saying forged paperwork has become sophisticated." He did not answer. At 1:03, she walked to the service wall carrying a step stool and a framed printout of the gala sponsors. In full view of the lunch crowd, she hung the printout over the section labelled Local Veterans and said to no one in particular, "This area remains reserved for verified histories. Committee policy." Then she looked directly at me and added, "We cannot make exceptions under pressure." I closed my notebook and stood. I did not request an exception. She smiled without warmth. Then we agree. The door chime rang before I could reply. It was a clean, bright sound that cut through friar hiss and conversation and left the room briefly suspended. 3 uniformed figures stepped in first, boots dark from road grit, posture unmistakably military even under civilian coats. Behind them came Irene Bell with 2 certified binders held against her chest and Deputy Clerk Hanley carrying a portable document case with county seals. Last through the door was Elena Ruiz, now Command Sergeant Major, shoulders squared, service pin at her lapel, eyes finding me in one sweep and then taking in the room Marlene had curated for months. Every stool turned toward the entrance. The waitress near my table stopped mid-step with a coffee pot in her hand. Cole rose from his seat so quickly it knocked against the counter. Marlene's fingers tightened on the edge of the sponsor frame until her knuckles blanched. Ruiz walked to the center aisle and spoke in a voice that did not need volume to command the room. "For the record," she said, looking first at Cole, then at Hanley, then at Marlene, "Specialist Casey Dawson pulled me and 3 others from an IED kill zone under fire." The sentence landed like a command dropped into a room that had forgotten commands were real. Friar hiss kept running for 1 stunned second. Then even that seemed to recede behind the silence spreading from the center aisle. I watched faces recalibrate in real time. Men who had been nodding along with Marlene's policy language now sat with their mouths slightly open, eyes shifting between Ruiz's insignia pin and my table. The committee volunteers by the pie case straightened as if posture alone could move them out of the blast radius of what had just been entered into record. Hanley recovered first. He stepped to the nearest empty two-top, set down his portable document case, and spoke in the clipped cadence of someone re-establishing procedure before anyone could turn a fact into a spectacle. Supplemental record capture, docket continuation, case note 24-CR-1187. Present are Board Liaison Cole, Witness Custodian Irene Bell, and corroborative military witnesses. He looked at me, then at Ruiz. This statement is being documented in open public setting due ongoing public allegations at this site. Marlene was still on the step stool, one hand gripping the sponsor frame, the other gripping the wall rail. "You cannot commandeer my business for theatre," she said, voice bright and thinning at the edges. "This is intimidation." Cole turned toward her without raising his voice. "Ms. Pike, you invited public adjudication by making repeated public claims during a pending records review. Sit down and refrain from commentary while documentation is entered." Irene moved with that same unadorned efficiency she had brought to my porch the night before. She placed the 2 certified binders on the counter beside the register, broke the county seals in full view, and rotated the first binder so the camera over the register had a clear line. "Witness Custodian Irene Bell," she said, reading from the cover sheet. "Archive transfer itemization corresponds to sealed packet opened at county records at 0931 hours. Certification numbers follow." She read the numbers slowly, each one a steel pin hammered into soft rumour. "Service Abstract ID Commendation Extract Code. Incident Review Identifier with Command Signature Index." Hanley repeated each number for capture and wrote them in block print on his evidence sheet. Ruiz watched the page, then nodded once at each entry before placing her own gloved fingertip beside the line where her signature appeared in the incident review copy. "Confirmed," she said. Then, First Sergeant Eleanor Ruiz, now Command Sergeant Major. Falcon Company Support Element. Signature matches mine. Operational date and location match Casualty Lane Report. The first of the 2 soldiers stepped forward, removed his cap, and stated his name and former rank. His voice was steady, almost gentle, as if he understood that the force here came from precision, not volume. "I was there for the extraction named in that report. Specialist Dawson was platoon medic on scene." The second soldier followed with his own name, his own unit confirmation, his own concise corroboration. Neither embellished. Neither looked at Marlene. They were not performing heroism. They were restoring sequence. By 1:11 p.m., every stool at the counter was occupied by someone who had stopped pretending this was lunch. I stood when Hanley looked to me and gave a small procedural nod. I stepped to the counter, close enough to smell scorched coffee and lemon disinfectant, close enough to hear Marlene's breathing turn shallow beside the pastry case. The evidence sleeve containing the metallic coin lay on the register mat. One of the soldiers unsealed it under Hanley's supervision and set the coin upright against the base of the receipt printer, directly beneath the camera lens that had watched Marlene narrate me into fiction for months. The engraved edge caught the fluorescent light. My call sign was there, the Platoon crest was there. Wear marks along one rim matched the old scar across my left thumb, where I had once worried that edge raw through a long convoy halt. Physical corroborative identifier, the inventory had called it. In that moment it felt less like an object than a witness that did not blink. Hanley spoke. "Respondent statement for supplement." I kept my hands at my sides so no one could mistake steadiness for trembling. "My name is Casey Dawn Dawson, specialist at Discharge Army Platoon Medic, Falcon Company Support Element. Active service dates are listed in the certified abstract you have entered." I confirm these records are mine. No flourish, no speech, just identity in the language they had demanded. Ruiz added one final line, eyes fixed on Cole. "If you require additional command verification, request through formal channel and I will respond under seal by close of business." Cole swallowed, nodded, and answered with newfound formality. "That will not be necessary for preliminary correction." Something moved through the diner then. Not noise exactly, but the collapse of a script. Two men at the counter who had laughed quietly the night before stared at the coin as if it might accuse them by reflection. Mrs. Talcott in the window booth pressed a napkin to her lips and did not look away from Marlene. The waitress who had asked me to prepay stood with a coffee pot tilted over an empty cup until dark coffee overflowed the rim and ran across the saucer. She set the pot down without a word, cheeks flushed, hands shaking once before she steadied them on her apron. Marlene climbed down from the step stool carefully, as if the floor had changed grade beneath her shoes. Colour had drained from her face in uneven patches, leaving her lipstick too bright against skin gone grey at the temples. She reached for a mug behind the counter and missed the handle on the first attempt. On the second attempt she caught it, lifted it halfway, then set it down again when porcelain clicked audibly against the metal rail. "This proves paperwork exists," she said, voice thinner now, each word clipped short by her breath. "It does not prove she did not curate this. People can stage witnesses." Ruiz did not answer her. Hanley did. "You are now contesting certified county and command-linked records in front of a liaison officer and registered witnesses. I advise you to stop speaking until counsel is present." She gave a short laugh that broke in the middle. "Counsel knows my position." Cole's jaw tightened. "Your position has shifted into potential bad faith filing if knowledge threshold is met. Be very careful." The room held still. Even the kitchen line had gone quiet enough that I could hear the refrigeration fans cycle on, above the pie display. One of Marlene's committee volunteers tried to step in with rehearsed neutrality. "Maybe everyone should de-escalate and reconvene privately. No one wants reputations damaged." Irene turned toward her with the kind of composure only grief can teach. Reputation was damaged when false statements were made repeatedly in public. Correction belongs in the same public. Then she looked at Hanley. "Please enter that claimant continued allegations after authenticated corroboration." "Entered," he said, pen moving. Marlene's fingers tightened around the mug again. This time her knuckles whitened so sharply that a customer nearest the register shifted backward on his stool, as if anticipating the cup might shatter. Her breath came in small catches, the sound of someone trying not to cough in a formal room. She looked at me directly for the first time since Ruiz stepped in and tried one final inversion. "You could have shown this years ago," she said. "You let this town believe what it believed." The accusation was softer than her earlier performance and somehow more desperate because it needed me to share blame for her choices. I felt the old reflex to explain my father's illness, the clinic nights, the cost of dragging private records through people who treated grief like gossip. I let that reflex pass. "What I withheld was personal," I said. "What you published was false." Cole exhaled slowly, then addressed Marlene with administrative finality that seemed to surprise even him. "Pending final board review, you are instructed to cease all public statements alleging fraudulent service by Ms. Dawson. Effective immediately, Events Committee is to suspend any exclusionary action tied to that allegation. Non-compliance will be referred." She blinked twice, quickly, as if clearing water she refused to admit was there. Referred to what? Civil defamation review and civic conduct sanctions under board bylaws, he said. That includes potential disqualification from committee chair duties during investigation. The words hung over the counter like a second verdict, quieter and in some ways heavier, because they were the language Marlene herself had weaponized for years. Policy, compliance, referral. She had always relied on audience perception to keep those terms pointed outward. Now they had turned and settled on her name. A man from the construction crew muttered, barely above a whisper, "So she served." Another answered, "Looks like it." No one sounded triumphant. They sounded chastened, as if they had discovered too late that nodding along had been participation. Hanley gathered the certified pages, slipped them into clear sleeves, and asked each witness to initial the temporary chain sheet. Ruiz signed first. The two soldiers followed. Irene signed with deliberate pen pressure that left the carbon copy deeply imprinted. Hanley then placed the coin back into its evidence sleeve, sealed it, and held it up long enough for the register camera and the body cam device on his lapel to capture the seal number. When he turned to me, his tone had shifted from procedural distance to professional respect. "Ms. Dawson, you may submit a personal copy of your service abstract for immediate local file update at continuation." "I will," he nodded. "Recommend you do." Marlene opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it when Cole raised one hand. Her shoulders, always squared behind that counter, had begun to round inward by degrees. One of the committee volunteers touched her elbow and she flinched, not violently, just enough that the volunteer withdrew. The sponsor frame she had been hanging remained tilted on the wall over the local veterans section, one corner caught on the hook, listing down like a sign installed in haste and left unfinished. Ruiz stepped toward me then, stopping at regulation distance. No embrace, no theatrics, only the acknowledgement of chain restored. "You hold your line well, Doc," she said quietly, using the old call sign register that belonged to our world and no one else's. "Finish it at 1400. "I will," I said. She gave one firm nod and turned to Hanley for departure protocol. As they moved toward the door, the chime rang again and let in a strip of cold daylight across the worn tile. No one rushed to fill the silence they left behind. Marlene stood with both hands braced on the counter, staring at the sealed coin packet's imprint on the register mat, as if the outline itself had weight. For months she had controlled this room by deciding which stories counted as civic truth. Now the room had watched that control fail under signatures, numbers, and witnesses she could not talk over. I picked up my notebook, capped my pen, and waited while Hanley handed Cole the preliminary supplement sheet, because the reversal was complete only when it was written where rumour could not edit it. Cole took the preliminary supplement sheet from Hanley, scanned the entries, and signed where indicated with a hand that looked steadier than it had an hour earlier. The motion seemed to return oxygen to the room. Chairs shifted. One spoon struck a saucer. The lunch crowd began to remember itself in fragments, but nobody returned to ordinary conversation. I could feel the attention still fixed on the register mat where the sealed coin had rested. Hanley closed his document case and addressed me first. "Ms. Dawson, continuation remains at 1400 in hearing room B. Bring your personal copy for file synchronization." "I have it," I said. He nodded, then turned to Marlene. "Miss Pike, you are under instruction to refrain from further public allegations in this matter before hearing continuation. Acknowledgement?" Her mouth tightened before she answered. "Acknowledged." Cole added, "I will expect compliance." No one applauded. Vindication in real rooms is quieter than people imagine. It sounds like signatures and restrained voices and the scrape of a stool pushed back by someone who wishes they had spoken sooner. As we moved toward the door, Mrs. Talcott stepped out from her booth and touched my sleeve with fingertips that smelled faintly of hand lotion and coffee steam. "Casey," she said, and stopped. Her eyes flicked once toward Marlene, then back to me. "I should have said something earlier." I held her gaze. "You did not," she swallowed. "No, I did not." That was all she offered, and it was enough to settle one more unfinished line in my head. She had seen and chosen silence. I nodded once and walked out into the cold. By 1:42 p.m, the annex hallway was full again. Reed and Klein stood near the water cooler reviewing marked pages. When I approached, Reed gave me a short professional incline of his head, the first direct acknowledgement of the day. Ms. Dawson, he said, we've reviewed the supplemental material. I set my briefcase on the bench and opened it. I am ready to synchronize the personal abstract copy and supporting local records. Klein glanced at the binder tabs I had prepared overnight, then at me. You documented everything. Yes. A beat passed, then he said, quieter, that was prudent. Inside hearing room B, Voss reconvened at exactly 2 p.m. Hanley entered the supplemental witness statements, Cole entered the preliminary board advisory, and I submitted my copy of the service abstract for local archive indexing. Voss asked one question that cut through the paperwork to the legal centre. Ms. Pike, after receiving instruction to refrain from characterisation, did you continue making public allegations at your place of business? Marlene sat at the complainant table in the same cream blazer, but the performance polish had worn off. I expressed concern about verification standards. Hanley read from his field notes. At approximately 1303, claimant stated, quote, this area remains reserved for verified histories, while respondent was present and active allegation remained pending. At 1305, claimant said, quote, we cannot make exceptions under pressure. Earlier statements contesting authenticity were also recorded after witness corroboration. Voss looked to Cole. Board position? Cole opened his folder, adjusted his glasses, and answered in formal cadence. Given certified records, corroborative command-linked testimony, and continued public allegation after warning, Board recommends immediate corrective notice, withdrawal of complaint, disqualification of claimant from Veterans Gala Committee pending review, and referral for civil defamation assessment by Town Council. Marlene turned to Reed as if expecting rescue through wording. Reed did not meet her eyes immediately. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful and stripped of earlier confidence. My client will comply with corrective procedures. Voss marked the order. Entered. Corrective notice will be read at Town Hall, open session this evening and posted to public bulletin and committee channels. Digital statements related to fraud allegation are to be removed before session start and logged by clerk. Miss Dawson's service status is hereby verified in county record. The sentence arrived without fanfare. Verified in county record, 5 words and years of sanctioned doubt lost its administrative shelter. Hanley handed me a stamped confirmation sheet and pointed to the disposition grid. Physical evidence items were listed one by one. Committee notice, scanned and attached. Photo timestamps, logged. Email chain, archived. Incident log excerpts, received as respondent notes, sealed archive packet and coin. Authenticated, resealed, returned to county evidence custody. Personal abstract copy, indexed. Local exclusion letters, accepted as context exhibits. I signed beside each line acknowledging status. No item was left floating. When we rose, Klein paused near my table. For what it is worth, he said. We should have asked different questions this morning. I put the confirmation sheet into my folder. You asked the questions your assumptions allowed. He accepted that without defence. Fair. At 5:58 p.m, Town Hall's meeting room held the same faces that had filled the gala and the diner, only now under municipal fluorescence that flattened every expression into plain, recordable fact. The wall clock ticked loudly between agenda items. Marlene sat 2 chairs from the end of the committee row with a typed statement in front of her, and both hands folded over it to keep the pages from moving. Lila, the registration volunteer who had called me at the first red light, managed the sign-in table by the door. When I entered, she whispered, I'm sorry for last night. And this time she did not look away. Cole called the session to order, moved through budget carryovers, then cleared his throat and said, Item 7, corrective notice regarding false veteran representation allegation. The room went still in the practiced way of people who know this will be quoted later. He read first from the county order, then motioned to Marlene. Miss Pike, you may read your statement. She stood. Paper rustled in her hands. Her voice started firm, then thinned around the middle lines. I, Marlene Pike, as chair of the Town Events Committee, issued and repeated claims that Casey Dawn Dawson falsely represented military service. Those claims were not supported by verified records. County Review has confirmed Ms. Dawson's Army service. I retract prior statements in full. I acknowledge committee actions based on those claims were improper. She paused, swallowed, and continued. I have removed related posts and requested removal from committee channels. Effective tonight, I resign from my role as chair of the Veterans Heritage Gala Committee. Cole said, resignation received and entered under recorded minutes at 1812. Hanley, seated near the clerk desk, lifted a tablet. Digital removal log complete at 1741. Archived screenshots attached. Another thread closed. From the audience row behind me, Nora, my cousin who had texted, "Do not make this worse," leaned forward and spoke just above a whisper. Casey. I turned. Her face was pale and earnest in a way I had not seen since we were children. I repeated what I heard. I didn't call you first. I should have. I held her gaze, then said, "You should have." She nodded, eyes wet, and sat back. No speeches, no embrace, just acknowledgement recorded in memory, if not in minutes. After adjournment, people clustered in doorways, speaking in low, corrective tones. The man from the hardware store approached, cap in both hands, and offered the kind of apology that never arrives early enough. "No offence doesn't erase offence," he said. "I know that now." He stepped aside before I answered, as if he understood this was not a moment to request absolution. Outside, evening had gone sharp and cold. I crossed to the diner because one final scene still belonged to the same geography where it began. Pike's front windows reflected streetlights and the faint red blink of the pharmacy sign. Inside, the service wall stood uncovered. The sponsor frame had been removed from the local veterans section. Blue painter's tape was gone. Empty hooks remained visible, where photos had been shifted and returned in haste. Marlene was behind the counter alone, stacking cups with deliberate care. When she saw me, she set one cup down crooked, straightened it, and said, "Your file copy is at the hostess stand. Committee courier dropped it." I walked to the stand. A clear folder waited there with my stamped verification, the corrected gala roster, and a new wall submission form already marked approved pending photo print. Physical items returned, status updated, chain complete. I looked up. "Why did you do it?" She did not pretend not to understand. Her eyes moved to the service wall and back. "Control," she said after a long breath. "I told myself it was standards. It was control." The words sounded like gravel in her throat. "You didn't perform the way this town expects, and I used that." It was the first fully honest sentence I had ever heard from her. It did not heal anything, but it ended speculation. Loaded reactions, unfinished lines, all of it reduced to a motive plain enough to file. I took the folder. I won't be making a speech. I know. I stepped to the wall and handed the approved form to the night manager, a young woman with tired eyes who had watched every phase of this from behind coffee pots. "Please place the photo when printed," I said. She nodded. "I will." I left before anyone could turn the moment into ceremony. Main Street was nearly empty, storefront glass dark except for the diner and the pharmacy. The military hall next door had gone black, its brass handles catching only streetlight now. I stood on the sidewalk between the two buildings and listened to the town settle around the corrected record. No microphones, no toasts, no one telling me where to sit. My phone buzzed once, a text from Ruiz. "Record closed," I typed back. Verified. Retraction entered. Committee resignation recorded. Her reply came immediately. "Hold your line." I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and looked at my reflection in the diner window until it stopped feeling like evidence and started feeling like ownership. I didn't need Marlene Pike to grant me a past. I needed the truth to stand where she tried to bury it, and now it did. My silence was no longer surrender, it was selection. My name is Casey Dawn Dawson. I served, I was verified, and I walked home carrying my own history in my own hands.